Would like to welcome everybody to the second keynote speech by the Honorary Transport Chair of the BIVEC-GIBET Association. The BIVEC-GIBET Transport Chairs awards an individual who has made a significant contribution to the field of transport and mobility within Europe. Professor Axhausen is this year's recipient, and during the BIVEC-GIBET Transport Research Days, he gave his first keynote speech. Now he will deliver his second keynote, and he will talk about his experience with long-duration service. With no further ado, I pass the floor to Professor Axhausen.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I have never been to Liège, so it's a great opportunity to join. What I will do today is really reporting on our survey experiences. So I will not talk about Matzen, I will not talk about politics at all. I'll just talk about how difficult or easy it is to get and obtain data through these type of studies. As you know, GPS tracking and studies have been undertaken since the mid-90s when Hélène Bolkamy started it all off while she was at FHWA and has taken off from there. At the start, we had little separate boxes which we had to give to people and had to get back from people. And now, ever since the smartphones put a GPS device into our pockets, they have been identified as a major source of data. Because, as we all know, travel diary in the classical form, either paper and pencil or as a telephone survey, have become ever more difficult because people don't participate as much as they used to in the past. And the hope with smartphone apps is that we can reduce the response burden, which has been identified as one possible reason why we don't like or respondents don't like to do it. What I want to do first is show you 3 studies which we have undertaken. And the first study is MOBIS, Mobility in Switzerland, and is a joint effort with the University of Basel. Professor Hintermann and his PhD students and my PhD students have to be acknowledged because they were involved in the often quite tedious and repetitive work which is involved. Now, what did we do in this study? It was a random control trial of a virtual road pricing system, because Switzerland, like all countries around the world, is interested in this issue, and at least the ministries and the administrations push it very hard while politicians shy away from it. So we had some money left over from a different project. We asked the ministry to give us the money to actually conduct the study, at least pay for some of it. And so off we went. So it's a random control trial in the style of what the economists like. So you have a control group, you have a treatment group, or you have 2 treatment groups, and you can do a difference measurement of the effects of the treatment that you're interested in. And in this case, we had a treatment for information about how many externalities the person were producing, and a treatment where they had to pay for the externalities they produced. That was the idea. How did we do it? We got a sample from the Federal Office of Statistics with current addresses. We had underestimated or overestimated the response, so we needed to buy a couple of extra addresses from commercial data dealers. And as you would expect, they were worse. Many more people dead and many more people had moved, but still good enough. We then sent them all a letter, and you'd say that's very old-fashioned. It is, but you can reach them, because otherwise you have to rely on those respondents panels where people have said they are willing to respond. And that produces obviously a bias, because you have people who are saying they're willing to respond. Now, sending out these letters, we noted, we hadn't budgeted for that. And that was a real fright, because sending out these letters is very expensive. You spend maybe 2 francs, 2 euros, €2.50 on sending out a letter, but if you have to send it out to 60,000 people, that sets you back quite a lot. Then in the letter, we explained what the study was, and then they were sent to Qualtrics website. They did the Qualtrics survey, those who did, and after they had said, yes, we are happy to participate in the GPS tracking study, they were sent to a download link where they could download the GPS tracking app. And then they had 4 weeks of before, no treatment, and then 4 weeks with treatment. And the control obviously didn't get in treatment, and the information group only got information. Now, at the end, the pricing group got a budget from us. So we said, based on what you did in the first 4 weeks, we give you the money so that if you don't change your behavior, you don't have to pay. To make sure of that, we gave them 20% more because there's obviously fluctuation. So they could actually earn money because we said anything which you don't use, you get in cash from us, in addition to the incentive which we paid them. They got weekly emails, and in them, we send them the information about the delays they had caused, the CO2 emissions, and their health impacts because of their behavior. The delays were estimated using MATSIM, which is a large-scale agent-based simulation of Switzerland, which we had at the Institute, so we could calculate it there. So they got a realistic estimate of their delays. Then, at the end of the study, we did a debriefing survey. We asked a couple of extra questions, and in particular, we asked them whether they understood the idea of externalities. And it turned out those who hadn't understood the concept behaved differently from those who had. So you really need to work at the public understanding of what you're worried about. And finally, we paid the revenue budget and that's Swiss francs. Now, be careful here. If your local financial administration doesn't do that, or can't do it, or is very complicated about it, you might not want to try, because we had to make 3,500 payments. So you don't want to enter those individually. Now, just to give you an idea how many people participated. So we started in September. We did it in waves so that we didn't get overwhelmed on the help desk. We had a peak of about 1,000 people participating then, and then it already started to taper off. And then, and I'm showing this here, and I'm not going to talk more about it, obviously COVID started. And because we saw that some people were continuing to track even after the end of the study, we just invited everybody back into track. And this is kind of the participation we had during the COVID period. So we have the MOBIS data, plus we have COVID data, COVID period data afterwards. And as you can see, the COVID numbers didn't really impact the participation all that much. Now, to give you an idea how large the externalities were, which we calculated, we took the numbers to some extent from official federal numbers. These are the fixed ones, but where you see variation, these are the numbers we calculated using MATSIM. And you can see that the externalities have a quite wide range for the car, from near nothing, these are people traveling on an empty road at midnight or 3 o'clock in the morning, to 11, 12 centimes per kilometer to 30 Swiss Rappen, which is at the moment, you can think of a franc as a euro. So quite substantial numbers. And this is what you then had. In the end, people had generated 170 Swiss francs worth of externality in the mean, okay, including the 20% top off. But that's quite a lot, but you can also see there's a very large standard deviation. So some people are really a problem and others less so. And you can see that from the maximum numbers. So some people were traveling extensively during peak hours and delaying people. Then at the end of the study, they were left with 45 Swiss francs, and they had generated another 132 Swiss francs of externalities. So it worked. People were saving money. So the 45 were theirs to keep. And for this guy with the maximum, he got a check for 430 Swiss francs for those 4 weeks of behavioral change, which he did. So what we saw, it worked, and we were able to do that. Now, what I want to show you here, you can do that. You can set up a study as complicated as that. You can recruit. These were 3,500 people in total in this way, but you need to have the budget, because remember, we paid everybody 100 Swiss francs incentive, and we paid 1/3, which is about 1,000 people, 1,200 people, 45 francs. So you need 450,000 francs just to run the study. But these are the numbers you need if you want to have something credible, because Beat, the economist and the team, said, oh, if I want to write a paper, I have to show that I can demonstrate that this is significant also for the errors of the second kind, and not only errors of the first kind, and errors of the second kind gives you much, much larger samples than you have to have when you just look at errors of the first kind. And that's probably one of the reasons why many economists look down upon us, because our samples are generally too small to say anything useful in transport. Okay, that's kind of the key message. The second study we did this with Beat and his PhDs and a couple of other PhDs of my group. EBIS stands for e-biking in Switzerland. And there we wanted to repeat the study, more or less Mobis repeat, but we wanted to focus on people owning e-bikes, because they are changing the behavior of cycling substantially, potentially, and we wanted to know more about this. Again, a random control trial with mobility pricing. There, we weren't able to get data from the BFS, from the Federal Office of Statistics. And that was right, because if you just use a random sample of the population, you waste a lot of postage, because most people don't have e-bikes. So we wanted to focus our attention on potential e-bike owners, and I'll show you in a moment. Here we had one subgroup for which there's officially registered data, which is the owners of what is called S-pedelecs. So these are these e-bikes which travel up to 45 kilometers an hour. And because they have a registration place, we know the addresses. And for two of the cantons, for two of the regional governments, we were able to get the registry office to send out the initial invitation letter for us. And that obviously is much better, because we address people who know. But obviously for all the people who just have a normal e-bike, we had to use other ways. Again, the process was the same. They read the letter, they started the Qualtrics survey. If qualifying, they would be downloading the app. We had 4 weeks prior, 5 weeks for treatment. We also had a control group because we wanted to also have more people who didn't have any bikes or e-bikes, just to be sure that we had the comparison. We then did the same externalities, we did the debriefing survey, and we paid. That's as before. Here, just to give you an idea how many people we were able to recruit, we were able to recruit nearly 4,000 people into the study, which obviously gives us an enormously large sample now. We have nearly a bit more than 3 million stages observed. We have 5.5 million activities observed. We have 400,000 person days, which is about 6 times the size of the National Travel Diary Survey. And in this case, we obviously relied on interest. People wanted to do that. Just to give you an idea, we did this across the whole country, with the exception of Italian-speaking Switzerland, which is down here. You can see the start points of all the trips which we had, and you see that we have the major cities, Geneva in the west, all the way to St. Gallen in the east, are kind of points of concentration. Obviously, and that's one of the problems, which is ever getting worse, is the self-selection of the participants. Now, here on the right column, you see the numbers for education in the last National Travel Diary Survey, which is the microcensus 2015. And there, it's an official survey. It comes with the proper documentation and letters from the Federal Office of Statistics. So it's a really high quality study. And they do re-rate it afterwards. But still, even there, you have to ask yourself, okay, who's taking part in this? Now, if you look at our study, ABIS, you can see that we have massively more highly educated people, university education or higher vocational education. General education or just mandatory education is minor in this study. And this is obviously a worry for us. We are rating those results based on more recent of the National Travel Diary surveys, but we still have to ask ourselves, who are these people? And to give you an idea, they are just more active. What I show you here is the number of daily trips for ABIS, for our study, versus the number of daily trips for the microcensus. You can see that they are doing nearly a trip more per day. If you look at the stages, the difference is even more glaring. So you can see these are people who behave differently. And when you see stages per trip, you can see this is obviously the effect of people being more bike friendly, obviously, and obviously public transport friendly as well. That goes together. You have a question?
Yeah, couldn't it be an issue of underreporting in the survey?
In the microcensus? Yeah,
people tend to forget trips, and if you track them, then you get all.
I think that's part of that, but the microcensus is pretty good. There is some underreporting in the microcensus, but on my experience, I would say it's maybe 0.2, 0.3 trips per day, so it's relatively minor. Because it's a really well done telephone interview survey, reminding people what they did, and so it's well done. You had a question?
Just a small question. So you mentioned the education levels,
yes,
which were quite different. Could you also link that to the number of trips?
We haven't done it formally, and yes, that will have an impact. But that's the next thing we have to do. And ABIS is unweighted, so you will get some changes after we do the weighting, but not much. One thing which is interesting, and that's why we actually did this, to learn a bit more about e-biking. Here, this is just a very initial analysis. I looked at the numbers of trips per day as a function of age and the two studies between males and females. And one thing which is quite clear after this is that the e-bikes, both the pedelec as well as the normal e-bikes, help people to keep moving. Whereas the microcensus, you have consistent drop in participation for the people who have an e-bike or an S-pedelec, they are willing to move. And I think that is quite important for us as we think about a world in which e-bikes become much more common than they are today. And it's a positive trend because that's what we want to see, that people still keep moving, because normally that means they also meet people, which we know is good for them. Okay, so this was ABIS. The third study we have just finished is called Time Use Plus, and this was a study done by us in Zurich, and Frau Winkler, Caroline, and Adrienne Meister were the two assistants on the project. This one is different because, as it says, time use. In my analysis, it has always been a problem that we don't know how much money people spend at the location they go to, because the money tells you about the importance that location has for the traveler, in particular its leisure activities. And we don't really know what they actually do when they're there. So we have no time use information. And in this survey, we are combining all three elements. So we built our own app based on technology by Motion Tag, which does the GPS tracking for us. On top of that, we then built an app which asked the respondents, I'll show that in a minute, to tell us about the activities they undertook, to verify the modes they used, and who came along or who they saw, and how much money they spent while they were there. And this was obviously quite important because that allows us to get information about where people do the work from home, which is, in many cases, work from anywhere. The employer doesn't see from where you log on, the employer sees that you have logged on. So this allows us to combine these three elements. We know where people are from the GPS track, we know what they do because they tell us, and we know how much money they spent. And again, we had a 4-week period in which we asked for them. It is quite substantial effort because on average, the daily interaction with the app was about 10 minutes. So for 4 weeks, that's quite a commitment of the respondents. There's one thing you have to pay attention to. You normally say to respondents, if you don't participate enough in the validation and the extra questions, you won't get the incentive. To make sure that they don't complain, you should check that regularly from early on and remind them as soon as you notice that they are getting lazy there or omit that task. So you really want to chase them up. And then we paid them if they had 28 validated days with a bit of leeway. And yes, I come to the payment itself. This is the app. As you would expect, there's a visualization of all the trips and the events. Then they told us what they did while they were at Hungerberg, which is probably a track either of myself or of one of the assistants. Ita Hungerberg is our campus. And then for shopping, we asked them how long it took and how much money they spent there. On these things, you can spend endless amounts of time to optimize it. And in the end, we weren't all not perfectly happy with what we had done. One problem we had and challenge is, as an academic institutions, you don't have people who can program this stuff well. Yes, you might find a PhD student who is able to do that, but then you normally get spaghetti code, you normally get code which is not maintainable, and if you as a supervisor tell him or her to do something else, you will be told, oh, I can't do this is too complicated. So. And then, certainly in the Swiss context, PhD students are rather expensive, salary-wise. So I would advise you go with the commercial firm, but select it carefully and have enough budget so that you can do 2 or 3 rounds of the survey of the tool itself, because you will make a first call, we'll find out in the pretest what you did wrong, you do it the second time, then you catch more further errors, then you have further ideas, have enough budget and enough time to do 2 or 3 iterations of the app. And we had the extra problem that the first firm delivered kind of the beta version and then said, we have enough of this, we want to do something else, so we had to find another firm. So you have this risk, but in all honesty, your PhD student could run away as well. So that's risk which is involved in doing this. So, but anyway, we got it going. We have now recommendations for what you might want to do differently, and we went out in the field. Now, one thing we tested, and I think that's an interesting result, obviously it's a small study, we asked ourselves, is there an optimal incentive level? And here we varied the incentive level between 50 francs and 100 francs, expecting that they would have to do quite a lot of this. Would be quite time consuming for them. Clearly, we are still not paying a salary in any form or fashion, given the average wage rates in Switzerland, but we wanted it to be realistic. We then tested in this pre-test whether we can ask them for 4 weeks or whether they kind of drop out after 2 weeks already. So what's the maximum we can do? We then asked them on the level of detail whether it's easier for them to describe their activities with just 5 categories or with 12. It wasn't clear to me what we would get. Now, what are the results? You can see that the participation rates, so the share of people who completed the whole study of the numbers contacted, is pretty similar for the 50 franc. It's about 2.5%. Yes, you get more people replying for 100, 3.6. But in the end, we said, no, we are not going to pay that much money for 1% more participation. We said that's not worth it. It's doubling the budget and you get only a 50% uptake on the participation rate. And one thing which we saw, and talking with the people and asking for them, is that they found it a lot easier to do it with a high detail. Because when you give them only a short list of purposes, they have to think about what their activities are. And there are things which are not quite unambiguous. And therefore, a detailed description is better. And maybe even if you have enough time, if you have that, offer an open field, which we didn't do. We just had another category. So that was quite important for us, that sometimes being more complicated is actually the better way than being too simple. And you don't have to pay all that much money. So I think if you ever do a study like that, it is worthwhile doing a pre-test to see if you can find the sweet spot, just giving the massive monetary implications of that. Okay, so these were the 3 big ones which we have done in the last couple of years. Let me talk about older studies and what we would now recommend that you do as a protocol, as the way how to conduct the study. I think sending a letter is a good idea, because a letter allows you to have proper stationery. It sends and speaks seriousness. And you can distinguish yourself from the usual spam mails which people get. We had a QR code on there, which obviously selects already people who know what a QR code is, and get to the screening survey. That allows you also to have a personalized QR code so you know who has responded, so you can track people and send the reminders on to those people who haven't really done anything. Now, depending on the study, you can either recruit from a known list of members, let's say members of a cycling club, or people who are, I don't know, interested in a particular association. You can address those. You can and should use official registries if you can do that, and if the official registries actually are high quality, which might not be the case in your local area. But if they are, use them. If you have to use address dealers, yeah, just be ready for replies from widows telling you that her husband has long since died. It's just something which happens. Yeah. And then have the app download as the next step, as part of the process, but only for those who are eligible. Then after the screening survey, and make that as easy as you possibly can. Because even if you make it as easy as you possibly can, you will have people phoning you up and asking you why it doesn't work and why they can't get it to work. Because the smartphones come in so many flavors, have so many options, so many things they need to switch on and off, that it is work, needs attention, and you need to help them. Not everybody, happily, but many. You then track, be ready, have a frequently asked question, have a help desk who answers questions, be friendly in the help desk so that you keep them going. Motion Tag, in this particular case, did the processing of the GPS tracks and returned to us stage purposes and modes. We let the users validate this. And I think it's really important that you ask for that, because even with the experience Motion Tag has, it still gets something wrong. There are the well-known issue of distinguishing between bicycles and cars, between buses and trams. You just need the respondent. And one thing which is really important, you can't find out who is the passenger any other way. Then you give them feedback. For example, in the MOBIS study, we got a weekly email. Then you exclude the not fully participating actors and do that as early as you can so that the hassle doesn't build up till the end of the study. Then you have to do the completion, you do the debrief survey, and I would recommend that you ask about the understanding of what you have done. Certainly for mobility pricing, it was crucial because those who didn't understand the concept of externalities didn't change their behavior as much or not at all in comparison with those who understand what an externality is. And I think it was about 50% of people who understood it and 50% who didn't. And Switzerland is a relatively well-informed society. Never mind. And then you have to send out the incentives. And again, have your finance department ready for sending out checks to 1,000 or 3,000 people. And if they say, we never do that, we can't do that, we don't want to do that, think of another solution before you even start. So what are the necessities you have to have? You need the frequently asked question leaflet, you need a strong help desk, and because it comes in peaks, I advise you to do it in waves so that you don't have to have an enormous help desk for 2 weeks and then nothing, rather keep them on over a longer period. Have standard answers for all the emails so that the student assistants or the assistants don't have to rewrite it every time. Just have formulas. Do the validation. Yes, if you have enough, do a second imputation, which is useful. Then the feedback. There, I would advise you to have a dashboard for yourself so that you can see what's going on in the study. MOBIS took 3 months, or in the end, nearly 3 years. So you want a dashboard which tells you what is going on in the study, what the responses are. And that's money well spent. Have the pipeline for the participant feedback so that that's automated. For example, in our case, taking the GPS tracks into MATSIM and running MATSIM and returning the estimated externalities. That has to be automated. Otherwise, you will never get there. Do the debrief survey and have the incentive payment. I told that already. So there's quite a lot of admin things which one doesn't necessarily think about when one starts. For example, the finance department question came, I hadn't thought about that and had naively assumed that ETH would do it, and happily they did. But I think in Basel, the colleagues were told, no, we don't do this, go away. So we had to do it for them. Okay. What other studies, just to give you an idea of the numbers involved and the response rates, the participation rates we got in the end. One thing which is what you can see already, if you just look at the last column, is that the difference in shares. So in EBIS, when we had known contacts, we got relatively, actually it must be the other way around, there's probably 10. No, with known contacts, we got a relatively low participation rate. But when they came from Velo Plus, which is an association of bicycle enthusiasts, the share of participation shoots up to 8%. So there's a large amount of self-selection in there. We had various studies in Geneva and Basel, which essentially were a bit more committed. So we got between 8 and 7%. But for Mobis on its own, we just got 4% participation. And that's obviously nowhere near what the statisticians assume when they talk about a randomized sample. So we have to assume that these aren't really random samples anymore in any form or fashion. And those who are really mathematicians might want to think about what that means for all the stats we do. And coming back to EBIS, just to show you the impact of the source of the addresses. We had one approach with Velo Plus where we essentially got nothing back. We had a second approach by Velo Plus where we got these nice, yes, that's now. Here, I took out this Velo Plus sample. Sorry, they were actually quite bad at responding. But here for Aargau and Basel-Stadt, we got the official contacts from the registry offices. We got relatively good participations. Cycle Week, which is an enthusiast newsletter, got us very high response rate. ProVelo, which is again another enthusiast site, they got us very high response rates. So we really have to think about how we approach people and how we pre-select them for our study. In some cases, it's perfectly fine to do that because we're interested in e-bike owners. We don't want to ask a general population. But later on, we have to worry about this. Just to give you an idea about how the duration impacts response or participation, this is using our own study and a couple of other studies. And you can see that if you just do one day, you can obtain pretty high response rates. 35% is very good. But it's only one day. So the study becomes very expensive because you have all the overhead of reaching them, have all the overheads of holding their hands, and then you do that for just one day. You don't really want to. But if you already do a week, it's dropping massively, the response rate. And this is the trade-off we have to think about. So it's a money versus participation trade-off. And there are certain academic questions which you can't answer with either a day or a week, where you want to have 4 weeks or 8 weeks or even longer periods to observe people over time. In particular, the last survey is COVID. There you really want to track people over the whole period. So there's a clear, as always, effort versus participation trade-off, and you have to choose at which point you want to be. And if you can do that without motivation, which is normally people with either motivated, it's actually normally an incentive payment, or highly motivated people, or if you have fewer motivations, then you get less response, in particular if the duration becomes long. Okay, questions so far? Yes?
One regarding the EV study.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, yeah. So basically you contacted quite enthusiastic people.
To some extent, yes.
And in some cantons like Adobe and Basel,
yeah,
it was based on the registration.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Did you see from that, yes, on the results? Because enthusiasts will probably use more and do more, stages.
Yeah.
And
We have a bit of that here. Here I distinguish between e-bike owners, which are just 25 kilometers maximum speed, and those with 45 kilometers. The 45 kilometers, you can assume that these are really committed cyclists, because the S-pedelecs are quite expensive, they're quite dangerous, so you have to be committed to that. And here at the first glance, we didn't really see much difference in terms of trip making. Now, this was the first purely descriptive analysis, and we have to do more of this work. And Adrian Meister is currently engaged in root choice modeling of this data set, and he will report on any differences he finds between them on this root choice behavior. And I'll probably do, and others will probably do, more descriptive analysis and see what differences there are in terms of travel behavior. Yes?
So I have a question regarding the use of e-bike.
Yes.
Of age.
Yep. Yeah.
It seems like compared with the micro sense, the trend of the it is like the 10 to 20 age group.
Yeah.
It's more than 20 and 30.
Yeah.
Like my personal feeling, the e-bike, it's more like expensive than the usual bike.
Yeah.
And the younger group, usually like they don't have like their own financial income, or as a younger group, they would like to do exercise.
Okay. As in terms of background, the first thing I want to see is there a difference between between genders. Okay, there barely is. I didn't test for significance of the difference, but that's something I can still do. But in terms of income, the 25, this are both these normal e-bikes as well as the S-pedelecs. Normal e-bikes are reasonably affordable. They are probably not much more expensive than a fancy racing bike. And money is much more available in Switzerland. I think the average income in Switzerland is about 60,000 Swiss francs per year. Young people, there's a much lower share of people who are continuing education. Most young people start to work, and they will get, I don't know, 40, 50,000 Swiss francs in starting jobs. So I don't think it's a question of income as much as in other places. But clearly in a country like France, where 50% of an age cohort goes to university and has to survive on whatever their parents pays them, it's a major concern. But in Switzerland, the share of university education is about 20% and 80% not. So the 80% are working, and the 20% to some extent are continuing to work as well. They work part-time. Certainly of the MSc students in the master course I'm teaching in, 50% work part-time. So yes, money is an issue, but I wouldn't kind of focus on that.
We never measured it, but I've seen the phenomenon that a family buys a e-bike, for the parents, and after a year, actually the youngsters start using it. So if you record trips here, you cannot assume that the vehicle is really connected or identified by the person.
Yeah.
Maybe have bought for the parents who stop biking.
Okay, we didn't ask that question either.
This has nothing to do with the shared e-bike, right?
No. I think this is the question whether we could identify shared e-bikes in the data set, but we didn't focus on that because it's a national survey and shared e-bike facilities are concentrated in some of the large cities. So no, we didn't really think about identifying the shared trips, although we probably could, but it's a bit quite a lot of assumptions we would have to make.
And a lot of your participations are from the different kinds of industries, SUSE as a group, like
Yes.
Alka.
Yes. And we know which channel that we approached them through, so we can identify that.
Because I saw you have outcome of like no contact and contact with the Velo Plus.
Yeah.
You just have a Velo Plus, so I was wondering why just Velo Plus? Do you have a lot of other group or?
Where is it? Where did I hide it? Yeah, here. No, here. Velo Plus. Velo Plus. Sorry, I got that wrong. Pro Velo is an enthusiast group. Velo Plus is a general newsletter, and it has a lot less commitment. So, and they gave us 160,000 addresses, but they weren't really productive.
Maybe one small question.
Yeah, please.
The advice that you gave that involves quite substantial budget. So
yes.
If we contextualize this in the Belgian
yeah.
or in a Walloon context, the budget is not there. So what can we retrain from your protocol if there's not sufficient?
I think you can retain the protocol, but you would have to be much more careful in the statements you make about the statistical power of your data set. And I think there might be questions where the small data set's perfectly fine. And as I said, transport reviewers don't ask you for the power of a statistical test, so you normally don't have to worry about this. But if you dare then publish it in economics, you will be asked. And there you would need to have a much bigger sample. And potentially, you can ask the sponsors, because if you can argue convincingly that that's necessary, if it's, for example, a really policy paper or policy analysis you have to do, they might say, okay, then we have to pay that much money. Think of replicating MOVIS, a virtual road pricing experiment for Belgium. And you're going to do that probably for the highways agency. And the highways agency is not short of money. And if they claim, they're lying. And if you explain to them that we need that sample to tell you something valid, they either tell you we don't care, and then you think, okay, do you really want to work for them? Or they do, and then they cough up the money. Yeah, what else can you do? And clearly, obviously, it's something else when you do a study for the equivalent of the SNF. The SNF, yes, if you go to the SNF and tell them you want 600,000 Swiss francs or euros just to conduct the study, the SNF will probably tell you, oh, are you thinking you're a medic? No, he isn't a medic, so he can't get that money. But I was surprised, Time Use Plus was actually funded from the Swiss National Foundation, so research money. And there, they were convinced enough of the study that they gave us, the incentives for 1,000 people. They gave me the money to pay for an outside firm to do the programming. So it was quite a substantial budget there. So wonders happen.
Explicit kilometer limits to construct.
Yes.
Then it certainly looks cheap.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. But I think if you really do it, I think one really have to make the case for it. You can't just say, okay, this is what I want. You have to make a case. And happily, Beat was able to show with calculations that that was a sample size we would need to be able to show a certain change in behavior. And that convinced the high-vis agency enough to pay. Yes?
In one of the earlier study, which is the MOBIS one, what sort of like behavior change that you have noted? It is most
okay.
choice, or it's beyond that?
Okay, I didn't show results here. Beat did the analysis of the impact, and there's a paper on that, and there's a final report on this. And he looked at the change in kilometers driven by mode. And what we are able to show was a price elasticity of about -0.3 for the price changes we did. So, which is comparable to the effects you see for fuel price increases. So we felt quite happy that this is a reasonable response we got. So people did respond, but only the people we asked to pay. People we informed changed behavior a bit, but not statistically significant. If we asked them to pay or virtually pay, they changed behavior enough to be significant. Good. Let's just show a couple of the methodological issues I wanted to write, blah, 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 blah. Here we go. Okay, one issue we have is the dropout of those studies. Because the validation at every evening takes time and effort by the respondents, so you would expect dropout. And you do. This is MOBIS, and this time by operating system of in which the respondent worked. And you can see that the iOS worked much smoother than the Android implementation of that validation survey, which MotionTech had done. And you can see the substantial difference in dropout. And then because we continued, you can see that continuing overall. So the GUI you're building has an impact, and it is worth investing in a proper GUI for the respondents to answer. And I guess many of you might be using Google Timeline as an ongoing GPS tracking survey of yourself. They can be improved further. And MotionTech can be improved further. All the others, there's RSG and other firms which offer these types of software. But you have to expect the operating system has an impact. And you might say, okay, will not work with Android people and just focus on iOS. Now, iOS is tricky because Apple has come out with the small iPhones, and the small iPhones are a disaster because the real estate on the screen is so small that you can't do anything proper. And we saw that in Time Use Plus. Those people with small screens, yeah, we had to exclude them. It's just not working. So, pick your poison. And then the dropout obviously has then further differentiation by age group, for example, but that's what you would expect in those studies. But again, it raises this whole question of how you reweight the data later on. And here, surprisingly, the younger people weren't really those who stuck around longest with us. One thing which I think is interesting, MOBIS gave us this huge data set, and they reported for extremely long periods of time. One student analyzed the data in terms of modal accuracy of the imputation, depending on the number of days he had the person observed, and also different numbers of validation days for the respondents. And you can see that the quality of the survey obviously improves if you keep them for a long time. And if you have them only very briefly, and 60 days obviously is already pretty long in comparison, you see that you don't get the same quality after all. So yes, we want to observe the people as long as we can to make sure that we can impute them as best we can. And with that, let me briefly summarize. We have this motivation duration trade-off. We have this issue of the incentive, and as I said, more is not necessarily better. There is a sweet point where you get enough people interested, but not interested just for the money. These people are normally very bad at asking or answering all the other questions. You want a sweet spot. Make sure that they feel appreciated, but that they don't start thinking you're paying them. You have this inherent self-selection in all of these studies, and this is an issue how we model it. So normally we would need a model which looks at the probability of a person participating, and only given that you can do the rest of the statistics. You have to invest in the user interface to be sure that this is as smooth as possible and as easy as possible. I talked already about the form factors on the mobile phones. As I said, the small iPhones are a disaster for these types of surveys. And you have to continue to maintain the motivation, provide feedback, kind of weekly, have a project website, have a proper staffed help desk. In the MOBIS study, we did some seminars with the respondents to kind of report them what we had observed in the COVID period, and make the publications available to them as easily as you want, so that they see that something happens with the effort they put in. They might not read the papers, but they see that something happens. Next steps. We have, in terms of survey methods, we really have to integrate time use working from home in our travel diaries. We really need to know when people are working and where. We can't assume it happens at work, and we can't assume it happens at home. It might happen anywhere. We should think about expenditures, because when we're interested in leisure, it really becomes important to know how much money is being spent. A dinner for which you spend 300 or 400 euros has a different importance to you than a dinner where you just spend 10 bucks for a pizza. That's a different event. And I think we should ask that. And as we know, I don't know how it's in Belgium, but in Switzerland, 40% of all trips are leisure travel. So they are as important as work in terms of mileage. We have to look at the sweet spot, as I said, participation versus trade-off. We have to think about what is the optimal duration. There's good arguments that you want 2 weeks at least of people to get an idea of the variance they have. But just the one-day survey is becoming difficult because of the recruitment costs. So I think there's lots to be said to go for at least, I don't know, a work day and to the weekend, so that you get a better idea of what people are doing. The stage detection, this is a question for the GPS, is still an issue. Stage detect means when are the people moving from one mode to the other. And this is particularly relevant for public transport, because is waiting time an activity of its own, or is the person doing something in that period? There we need to invest more effort to get the stages properly detected. We should change the imputation algorithm so that they integrate the information of multiple days, as I showed you with the last slide. And if you're talking with Motion Tag and other firms, how can we really integrate real-time learning so that the validation information is immediately fed back into the imputation algorithms you're using on your data, so that you can do that while the study is still going on and not do it after the fact as we did. And with that, it's for the questions. Here you find things which might be of interest. E-Bike City is a story map where we explain the E-Bike City project with example designs and other things, and the other stuff is where you find our results. Thanks a lot. Questions?
I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. You mentioned that the young people were less interested to follow the survey during the time. For me, it was interesting to know if you have here, if you have any clue of the reason. Maybe it's because of the period of the survey, exam period, or something started.
No, I think this was IBIS happened from fall of 2020 up to the spring of 2023. So that you had all types of periods. There was Christmas, there was maybe exam periods. No, it wasn't. We didn't do it just in 1 week where all the students had exam periods. No, it's a mixture.
Just for clarification, the stage imputation would have it offline, right?
That happens after the fact. Yes, clearly, if you have somebody programmed for you, you would do it while you go ahead. But okay, because we were using Motion Tag's SDK, we also contracted with them that they do the analysis of the data for us. As I say, if you have enough programming skills in-house, you can do it all in-house. But be ready for an enormous amount of effort to keep on top of things with regards to the operating systems. Because certainly Google, no, not so much Google, but Android comes in dozens of different flavors for each of the mobile phone producers. And they change the rules unilaterally at a whim. And you have to have somebody who's keeping track of that. And you have to do the same with iOS. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think you probably shouldn't do it in-house, because there's so much effort in keeping these GPS tracking devices running. Maybe you have a genius, then go ahead. Otherwise, keep your hands away. Yeah.
A couple of slides later, there's the graph where it shows that the accuracy improved over time.
Yeah.
What accuracy in terms of what, actually?
Modal detection.
Oh, okay.
Further questions?
From a methodological point of view, and you already mentioned that response rates in this kind of surveys are very low. To what extent do we then still need to depart from an official or pseudo-official register if in the end it's the richness of the individual data points that are there?
Now, I think if it's a completely convenient sample, you will have difficulties with the reviewers. And even your convenience sample might not participate all that much. And the work you have is in convincing the people to participate, and then install it properly, and do all the help desk work. And in particular, if you then want to get a wider view of the population, an official registry is really the way to go. So I think we should still work with official registries as much as we can, and do the surveys as smooth as possible so that we exclude as few people as possible.
other questions? If not, then let's thank our speaker once again.
Thank you.